Hi, it's Mark from Top Local. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, Vancouver's best auto service experience. 17-time winners of best auto repair in Vancouver as voted by their customers. How you doing, Bernie?
I'm doing very well.
So we're going to talk about it in a classic. Some people would say. Other people would say a strange vehicle to begin with, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? This is a '69 Chevrolet Corvette that was having some headlight issues. What was going on with this vehicle?
Well, basically the excuse me, the headlights in this vehicle, sometimes they'd come on, sometimes the high beams would work, sometimes the low beams would work, and sometimes they just shut off completely. So there was quite a few issues with the headlights on the vehicle, but not reliable, that's for sure.
So it sort of sounds like a vintage English car, but I guess this is a '69, so it's got the hideaway headlights. I bet that was fun. How was that to deal with?
Well, it definitely adds some complexity to the repair, but in this case, this was a purely electrical issue. Hideaway headlights are kind of neat in this car, but that's actually a complete vacuum operated system, which is kind of a, I don't say a nightmare of its own, but it has the vacuum system, basically uses engine vacuum. There's a little storage tank and a bunch of switches and valves. So when you turn the headlights on, it actually pops the lights up and closes them down when you shut the switch off. And you can also flip them up manually to leave them up all the time. This car is a bit of a, not perfect. They need a bit of work, so the actual headlights have to be operated up and down with a manual switch. But there's not much crossover between the electrical and the vacuum system. They're separate. So when the lights actually don't illuminate, that's actually an electrical problem.
So where do you start diagnosing this kind of issue?
Well, you gotta, with any electrical problem, you gotta start at one end and just from experience, pick which end you want to start with. Is it the end where the headlight is, or is it the end where the switch is? And it's a lot easier to access the headlights. And the owner just bought this car, and there was a box of new headlights in there that the previous owner said, hey, you should change these lights. So I thought, well, we want some done anyway. So we started with the headlights, pulled everything apart. And what we first of all found, a few of the headlights were actually broken, so that was a part of the issue. But in being able to take the lights out, we were able to test the wiring and found that there was a bad ground to the lights. And in fact, a lot of the front lights didn't work as well. So it was a matter of finding that common ground wire and why that connection and why that end of it wasn't working.
So what else did you eventually find was the problem, and how did you fix it?
Well, what we found is the ground wire is located near the front of the vehicle, near the headlights on a metal tab. Interesting thing about a Corvette is it's a fiberglass bodied car. So, there's lots of metal around, but it's not as plentiful as an average car, which is all made of steel. So you have to hunt around for your ground wires. The wiring is there's a little more wiring on a Corvette than there would be of an equivalent 1969 car because of, the body isn't a complete ground. So once we found the ground wire, found there was a bad connection, but the connection actually ended up not being repairable. So I ended up finding a new ground source and repaired that. So I'll probably just share a few photos while we're at this juncture here. And so we've got, here's a sort of view of the hideaway headlights. This is the passenger side. You can see that there's a covering around the headlight. And on the driver's side here, we actually have this, I took this picture when it was partially apart. I don't have any fancy videos of things going up and down. It is kind of cool to watch, but we'll do that at a later date. But here's the passenger side with the cover. There's a cover with a few screws you remove, and then you can get at the lights and remove them. And what's kind of neat about this cover, it's a '69 car. The cover, which on any modern car, even a few decades old, would be made of plastic. This one's made out of like a thin, tinny pot metal. So it's kind of neat working on this kind of stuff because it's like kind of working on a museum piece in a way that still drives down the road. The wiring problem. There's our ground wire. It's a close-up view. That's the actual wire that was bad. I cleaned it up first of all. This is the hole where it screws into it. You can see it's a fairly thin gauge piece of metal, and when I went to screw it back in, it just wouldn't tighten back up, which happens. It's probably really good for one or two. In this case, only one shot. It's probably never been removed since the factory, but there's basically corrosion that built up in this area and just wouldn't allow the ground connection to happen. So we found a better source elsewhere. So I will just close these pictures down and
yep, you're back.
I'm back.
So we haven't often spoken about cars this old. Do you work on a lot of vintage cars like this?
Not too many, and to be honest, we try to avoid them at our shop. It's tricky to get parts for old cars, but I will say that we seem to work on a lot of old Corvettes and a lot of older Mustangs. These are two cars where you can actually get a lot of parts fairly easily. I mean, things like I should say on this Corvette, there's a couple other problems with the lights too. The high beam, low beam switch, which is located in the floor, was broken. And these are parts that you can still buy quite easily. So some of these parts, I mean, they just made millions and millions of them. The same switch is used in GM cars for, you know, I say like millions and millions of them. So there's still a demand to make parts. But you can pretty much buy anything you want for one of these Corvettes. Unfortunately, a lot of it is cheap, made in China junk, which is kind of unfortunate. So it's a little bit of work to find the right parts. But there's a few select vintage cars we will work on in our shop, and they're kind of fun. Although I made myself the vintage guy here now because I'm kind of grew up with these cars. A lot of my newer younger guys are kind of like, oh, how do you fix that? I'm going, I'll just take care of it. It's easier.
So some fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you have a vintage car in Vancouver and you want Bernie to work on it, bring it into Pawlik Automotive. He'll look after you. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 or check out our website, pawlikautomotive.com. Tons of videos on there. YouTube channel, got 4 years plus of videos. Lots of controversy. Check it out. Top local rank, or sorry, Pawlik Automotive on YouTube. Thanks, Bernie.
You're welcome, Mark.